As the partial government shutdown enters week 3 with no end in sight, we're getting a picture of how the fight in Washington could affect people across the rest of the country. If Congress and the White House can't come to a deal to fund a quarter of the government by February, millions of Americans who receive benefits from the country's food stamp program, SNAP, risk having their assistance cut off. The IRS has also been forced to send home 90% of its employees ahead of its busiest season. That could delay tax refunds. A recent piece in the Washington Post breaks down the potential consequences of the shutdown. Economic policy reporter Damian Paletta co-wrote that piece, and he joins me now from Washington. Damian, thanks so much for joining us. Break down for us what is at stake for families, first of all, if the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, does not get funding before next month. How many Americans could this affect?
Sure. So there's around 38 million Americans, many of them children and elderly people, who receive monthly benefits under SNAP, a couple $100s a month. And there's been studies that show this money really helps prevent people, from sliding even further into poverty. And so the issue is they only have funded the SNAP program through January. And since the Department of Agriculture is not funded under this current lapse in Congress, there is no more money for this program as of February. Now, they have some reserves that could maybe cover, 60% of the monthly balance, but they'd have to decide who would get that money, whether, everyone would have to take a cut or some people just wouldn't get anything. And they're scrambling right now to sort that out because they did not anticipate this shutdown to go on as long as it has.
Well, so if the shutdown continues, is the government planning to implement any measures to make sure that people are able to get food? I mean, what can be done?
Well, they've never faced a situation like this before. I mean, there simply is no money for the program. They have not funded the Department of Agriculture, and so I suppose they could, institute some sort of emergency, but that would require, Congress to become involved and appropriate the money. And right now, everything is bogged down over the debate about the wall. So they are scrambling right now to figure this out. They only have a few more weeks before, the impact would hit. And like I mentioned, we're talking 38 million Americans, obviously many of them low income and poor, and they've never been in a situation like this where it risked being cut off immediately.
Well, in your article, you say that not only will this disruption hurt families who depend on food stamps, but also grocery stores and other businesses. Can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely, yes. So for most people, this money these aren't food stamps like people would think of 50 years ago. Mm-hmm. For most people, these are like credit cards they get where money is automatically deposited each month. And many people go and immediately go shopping at the grocery store with the money they get because they need to refill their refrigerators or their pantries. And so businesses, will really get hit. I mean, we're talking $4 or $5 billion in February that would not be spent because that money would not be put on the cards. So there would be a lot of impact both at large grocery stores and smaller grocers around the country in every state.
Yeah, and I just keep going back to that figure that you quoted at the outset, the 38 million Americans. It is really hard to get your head around just how many Americans this will impact. But I also want to ask you about what's going on at the IRS. How will this impact the millions who will be filing their taxes in the coming months?
Right. So last year on January 29th was the first day that Americans could begin filing their taxes. And as we know, people that think they're going to get tax refunds, they tend to file first because they want that money back. Last February, about $140 billion in tax refunds was paid out by the IRS. Now, the IRS has sent home 90% of its staff without pay indefinitely because they are also not funded under this government shutdown. We're expecting to hear from them early this week their plan for the tax filing season. That will include whether they're going to process tax refunds. Last year, they said they would not process any tax refunds during a shutdown, but they're under, incredible pressure to reverse that because of the potential backlash. So we might even hear whether they're going to have to move the April 15th filing deadline because they won't have enough personnel. So, a lot of that we'll find out in the coming days, but that's a tremendous amount of money that would be sucked out of the economy next month if Congress or, the IRS or the White House doesn't sort this out quickly.
Right. And on that point, so every year the government pays out billions in tax refunds. What will a delay in returns mean for the greater economy without that money in circulation?
Yeah, I mean, it's $140 billion in February.
Yeah.
It's with a B, okay?
Right.
And that's a tremendous amount of money. That could single-handedly, push the country towards a recession if that money is not put into the economy. A lot of people get their tax refunds and go immediately spend it on something, or they pay down their credit card. This money gets pumped back into the economy quickly, and we've never had a situation before where this just doesn't happen.
Use the R word, though. I want to be very clear here. I mean, is that a realistic possibility that, in fact, not having that money in circulation could, in fact, drag down things economically so far that it could push the country into recession?
So the economists that I've talked to said they believe the first quarter of 2019, the first 3 months, will not be strong, will not be as strong as we saw in 2018. And if you add to that this idea that this money will not be put into circulation, this $140 billion, then you're pushing it really close to a possible recession scenario. Recession means that essentially that the government does not grow and it contracts. The economy contracts over the course of a period. So, as these things begin to snowball, so if people don't get their tax refunds, they stop buying things, then companies get hit and they don't reinvest or hire new workers. All those things can kind of collide into a big economic mess. And I think we're anticipating that will happen in February unless all these things get resolved quickly.
So I know you said that we're waiting to hear from the IRS here in the coming days, but has the government outlined any kind of plan for the upcoming tax season if the shutdown continues?
So last year they did. Last year, as part of their contingency plan that they published, they said that they would not issue any tax refunds during a government shutdown. They have not issued their plan for this year. And usually this is around the time of year when they say, because we're almost up against tax filing season, all the deadlines and when things will go into effect. And so, like I said, we're expecting that maybe Monday or Tuesday, and there's going to be a tremendous amount of interest and scrutiny and possibly even stock market reaction to whatever they say. Because, like I said, this is a lot of people, this is a lot of money, and this is a lot of money that gets put into the economy immediately.
Really sobering to hear about the possible consequences if this shutdown continues. Damian Paletta, thanks so much for sharing your reporting and for being with us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.